this town. I gotta say, one of the first genuinely cool rallies of the campaign happened right here in Chicago.
I was there.
Now, I was so grateful in part because Evelyn and my kids were around too. It's like the first time where I think Evelyn was like, oh, this might go somewhere. So back to Chicago. It's great to be here for my new book, Forward. Thank you all for picking up this book. I'm so excited to, now I'm going to print it for you. This is going to be a spoiler-filled talk about the book. But it's great being here among some of the people that helped fuel my unlikely presidential campaign, to 7 national debates, to the heights that we achieved. And I hope those of you who were part of that campaign feel somewhat responsible for cash relief and the child tax credit and all of the anti-poverty measures that have taken place in this country over the last number of months. We did it, and I hope you actually feel that. And this is what drove me when I decided to run for president, which at the time was a very unlikely decision. Donald Trump had won in 2016. You all remember that night. And I was watching this with Evelyn thinking, wow, things have gone really dark very quickly. It's like a big red flag. And so when I was thinking about what I could do, when I was trying to figure out what the cost benefit is from running for president, because I consider myself a fairly reasonable person. So I looked at the costs, and the costs were time away from my family, opportunity costs, and possibly total public humiliation. Those were like the 3. And then on the upside, it was help our country understand what's happening to it, advance universal basic income as a mainstream policy solution, and potentially accelerate the end of poverty in our time. And so when you look at that cost benefit, it's like, well, I guess I have to do this then. Because if you looked at the minus side, it was all on me. And then the pluses were potentially nationwide or even global. So I decided to take this on, and during that time, at the beginning, I gotta say, and I write about this in the book, in the beginning, even friends of mine thought it was nuts. I was on a panel with a guy named Michael Tubbs, who's the mayor of Stockton, California, early on in the campaign. How many of you all know who Michael Tubbs is? Raise your hand on that. Yeah, he's a great guy. So we're on this panel together, and then I talk about, hey, we should just start giving everyone $1,000 a month. And after the panel, Michael Tubbs comes to me and whispers in my ear, Andrew, you can say shit that I could never get away with saying. Because if a young black mayor went around saying we should give everyone in the country $1,000 a month, people would laugh at him or say he was being ridiculous. But if the magical Asian man from the future comes and tells everyone we should give $1,000 a month because of AI and robots and the rest of it, it's like, oh, we should really hear this man out. He's got some very interesting ideas. So that was what the early stage of the campaign was like. And for those of you who embraced that time, again, I mean, to see the movement grow and grow from those early days. And I came here to Chicago maybe half a dozen times, and every time I came, the crowds got bigger and bigger and bigger. How many of you, actually, this is going to be a bit of a deep cut, how many of you actually came to Iowa? Yeah, you notice they're all here in the front.
I wanted to go, Andrew. I wanted to go, man.
You were there in spirit, brother. Oh, you look great. So we come here to Chicago. Iowa became something of a second home to me. It was also one of the other times where I actually got to impress my kids, because my kids generally paid zero attention to the presidential campaign, which I'm actually kind of grateful for at this point. And they caught on to the fact that something cool was happening when they saw a giant bus with Daddy's head on it. They were like, wow, Daddy has a bus! They like run in. And then one of my very thoughtful staffers had set up like, you know, a Nintendo or a game console on the bus. So that bus crisscrossed Iowa, and we went there to fight it out. I had a vision early on in the campaign where I said, if we get 40,000 Iowans on board with this, we can eliminate poverty, or at least take a giant step towards doing so. So Iowa was this massive battleground for us. I visited Iowa 24 times, something along those lines. People from Chicago, some of you are here today, came on down and helped fight it out. And during this time, I felt so supercharged. I felt like one of those characters in one of these medieval movies, you know when they're like on horseback and they're riding? It's like in slow motion, it's very dramatic. You know? And we were going 100 miles an hour. And then when the voting started in Iowa, New Hampshire, it was like the horses disappeared. It's like you were on horseback 1 minute, and then the next minute you're like on the ground, like looking for your helmet. That had gone on. And up to that point, I had done approximately 0 reflection on anything I'd been going through. Because when you're a candidate at that scale, I was not exactly going back to the hotel and being like, oh, what happened to me today? Let me let me type up a journal entry. Like that was not happening. I was like a blunt instrument where it was like, okay, event, do, interview, do, phone call, do, like, you know, snap a video, record an ad. So it was all I could do just to execute in any given day, and then as soon as they let me loose, I would just be like, oh, like slump. And the last thing I wanted to do then was use my head and think and process. So it was only after the campaign ended that I felt I need to figure out what the heck just happened and process it and document it. And that is the book that you all have in your hands. When I got off the trail and started trying to figure out what had happened, first there was the journey that I'd gone on. But more than that, I was trying to figure out why our country feels so stuck, why it feels like things are not working. And I felt this immense obligation as someone who, thanks to many of you, had actually made a national case to think, okay, what is the how in terms of how we actually move forward? If the what was universal basic income in this anti-poverty vision, right now, 2/3 of Americans are for it. You know, we kind of accomplished our mission, those who are on the campaign. I thought the problem was that Americans had not heard of universal basic income. If we could solve that, then we'd be on our way. It turns out I was wrong. What is the problem actually? The problem is that our government doesn't actually really listen to or respond to or care about what we think or want. That's actually the problem. Right now, 65% of Americans are for basic income, so you'd think, okay, we should have it or have some version of it. But it's running aground of the system. And this is what I figured out over the last number of months, digging in not just to my own experiences, but also the conversations I've had with people who are on Capitol Hill, the folks who've been trying to solve this problem for a number of years to no avail. And the problem can be summarized like this. And if there's one idea I want you to take away from our talk here today, it's this. If everyone does what is in their rational interest here in the United States of America, we are fucked. Like that's really the takeaway. Is that we have this system of incentives that's been built up, and at this point, if everyone does the reasonable thing, we're doomed. So what do I mean? We have this system of incentives now that is designed to put us in opposite corners and not actually solve any meaningful problems. Right now, what is the approval rate for the US Congress nationwide?
2%.
Someone yelled dog shit, which is funny. The real number is 28%, which is actually a little bit higher. Like it's crept up. It was like at 21, and now it's all the way up to 28. Yay! Right. What is the re-election rate for individual members of Congress? 92%. So that's a bit of a mismatch. 3 out of 4 of us are sad about what Congress is doing or not doing, but if you're an individual member, you're almost assured of getting your job back if you want it. And oh, do they want their job back. You know, it's not often be like, oh, like actually, let me go home. Most of the time they want that job. So why the massive disconnect? It turns out that the structural incentives are such that an individual member of Congress does not need to please 51% of the people in their district or community. 83% of the districts in our country are either very blue or very red. So the game plan to get reelected is not deliver, it's to placate or please the 10 to 20% most extreme partisans on one side or the other. And I'm here to tell you all, Chicago, in some cases, those people are really weird. You know what I wait. So the 10 to 20%. So then, if you are a reasonable legislator, you will say, okay, to keep my job, I just need to avoid getting challenged in the primary. If I do that, I'm going to win. If I get to the general, I win. So that is the game. And you have legislators now who, even if they entered the system as reasonable people, become less reasonable and more extreme over time because that's where all their incentives lie. And then on top of that, you have media organizations who are also rewarded for separating us into ideological camps and giving us what we want. In my book, I quote an MSNBC producer who said, "We're not news, we're comfort." Think about that one, right? So in that kind of environment, then, you're going to give people the red meat that they desire. It's going to separate us further. And then you have social media just pouring gasoline on the whole thing. And with this environment, the more ideological and extreme and inflammatory I am, the better I'm going to do. The more reasonable and centrist and prone to compromise I am, the worse I'm going to do. I was with a senator last week, and she said to me something that we all really need to understand. She said that at this point, the political parties benefit more from keeping an issue around than resolving it. Well, what did she mean by that? Example, Marco Rubio bravely sets forward a common sense immigration reform package a number of years ago. You all remember this? If you don't remember, it's because he then said, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it, about a week later, after he was pelted from within his party. Because if you're in one of the positions of leadership and you do try and reach across the aisle, you're going to get attacked from your own side. And then, actually, if your side can just blame the other side, then you actually make out much, much better. If you compromise and do something, you might lose your job. If you say it's the other side's fault, you raise more money, you keep your job. This is a reasonable summary of where we are in American life. Does this sound familiar to you all? Yes. Okay. All right. So what is the fix? Is there a fix? What's the solution? I'm here to say, Chicago, there actually is a solution. And it comes from the great state of Alaska. And if you're a fan of mine, you're thinking, data, oil, what's the oil of the 21st century? But it's not that. It's not the petroleum dividend. Believe it or not, it is kind of funny that we're back to Alaska again. It's like, oh wow. So, how many of you have heard of Senator Lisa Murkowski in the news lately? Like, all right, somebody clapping. Now, why is she in the news? She is the only Republican senator who voted to impeach Donald Trump, who is also up for re-election next year. Her approval rating now stands at 6% among Alaskan Republicans. Turns out they really don't like trying to impeach their leader. This is a very clear sign of the political incentives that everyone in the party is operating under, is that if you go against Trump, it's essentially political suicide. So why did Senator Murkowski do this thing? It's because last year they actually changed the process in Alaska, where instead of a party primary, where she has to please the 10 to 20% most extreme, in this case Republicans, in her district, now it goes straight to everyone in the state, 51%. It's an open primary, decided via ranks choice voting. Do you think that had something to do with maybe her ability to make this decision? Yeah. Oh yeah, because if you have to go through a Republican primary, you lose like that. But if you can take your case to everyone in the state, then maybe a critical mass of people say, you know what, I like Senator Murkowski, she's done great work for us. This is the incentive switch that we've been waiting for as a country. This will actually enable our legislators to become more independent, more principled, more reasonable overnight. You believe it? Alaska coming through for us again. And I want to take us back to first principles for just a moment. If you look at the Constitution, there's not a word about political parties, to or otherwise. And if there are any words about political parties, they're very, very negative from that time. George Washington said factions, partisanship, enemy of patriotism. John Adams said his worst nightmare is two great parties that just clash and clash. Does that sound familiar again? It turns out that the duopoly is very, very poorly designed. And it's poorly designed in particular in terms of it being resistant to authoritarianism. Because if one of the two great parties succumbs to bad leadership, there are virtually no safeguards at that point. Because everyone's incentive is to fall in line behind that person, and then the other party gets cast out as the greater evil, and so everyone will say, well, you know, I don't love this guy, but certainly better than that on the other side. And as a result, we are immensely vulnerable to authoritarianism. It's almost staggeringly a giant design flaw. The duopoly is a design flaw, Chicago. It happens to be a design flaw that could kill us all. Truly. This polarization I was describing before, all the incentives are in that direction. Your political incentives, the media incentives, the social media incentives, the money. It's all about driving us into these two camps. And you could say it's hyperbolic to suggest that maybe we're going to degenerate into conflict and unrest and political violence, or worse, but I'm going to say I think it's all very much on the table. Would you all agree?
Yes.
I mean, we've already seen unthinkable political violence, the attempted insurrection earlier this year. The unthinkable is now very much a real possibility in the United States of America. I mean, that's another thing we should absorb from the last number of months. Whatever crazy dystopian nightmare scenario you can imagine, yeah, we should probably worry about it. You know, it's pretty real. When I was running for president, people accused me of being kind of, you know, a little bit negative. Being like, oh, you know, like we're gonna automate this, we're gonna automate that, and be like, oh, you know, like, remember this? Yeah. And we're now living a version of that reality. The polarization is going to lead us to violence and ruin. It truly will. It's a design flaw that would be the worst nightmare of our founding fathers come to life. We've been limping along with it for about 150 years or so. And now is our chance, our only chance, to try and change it, to try and make it right. 62% of Americans now want there to be a third party or an alternative to the duopoly. Think about that for a second, 62%. If you were an entrepreneur and you arrived at a market that had those features, 2 companies and 62% want an alternative, you'd be like, oh, I should start a third company immediately. I bet it does quite well. But the mechanics of our system actually make it very difficult for a third party to exist. There's this funny circularity. It's like, oh, we all want a third party, can't have one, can't have one. Why not? Mechanics discourage it, mechanics discourage it. And so the mission of the Forward Party is to change the mechanics so that they'll actually work. Now, I've been publicly touting this message for, 2 weeks or so. I gotta say, I've genuinely really enjoyed my 2 weeks as an independent. And so many people are all about the spoiler effect, be like, oh, you're just going to screw it up for one side or another. And then I just turn to them and say, why don't we just change the system so that anyone can vote for anyone and there's no spoiler effect? And there are a group of people right here today that are working on making this a reality here in Illinois. Where's Faribault, Illinois? Right there? Yeah, let's give it up for Faribault, Illinois. So just the way that we spent the last number of months mainstreaming universal basic income and bringing it to the American people, such that now 2/3 of Americans are totally for it, now we are going to do the same thing for open primaries and ranked choice voting as the skeleton key that's going to unlock us from the madness and actually give rise to the kind of dynamism and innovation politically that we've been waiting on for years and years and years. This process switch that happened in Alaska is the answer. And now we're going to take it to states around the country. It turns out because the Constitution has 0 words about political parties, all of it is at the state level. The states completely decide how to run their own elections, what the primary process looks like. So how many of you here in Illinois are excited about taking what Alaska did to the rest of the country? It's all here for us because if enough Americans get together and say enough is enough, we want to make this change, we can enable ballot initiatives in 24 states around the country and reward our leaders for actually serving us and being more reasonable. We don't have unlimited time to do this, Illinois. We have to get this done in 13 months, give or take. Because the country is heading toward a very, very nasty election in 24. And some of you probably saw the email I sent out, but it's in all likelihood going to be Biden-Trump, the sequel. I know, looking at that being like, oh wow, we're going to run that back? I wasn't even loving it the first time. It's a sign of where our institutions are that that's the most likely scenario. And I'm going to suggest that if we're going to make it through that time, we have to run like mad, not walk, but run like mad to unlock as many legislators as we can, like Senator Murkowski was unlocked. Imagine a country where we get these ballot initiatives passed, and let's call it 5 states, and all of a sudden there are 10 more senators who are able to act independently. That could be the difference between the survival of this democracy and its demise a few years from now. You all came to a book talk. I'm now giving you the responsibility of saving America's democracy. You're like, wow, it's a lot of pressure for a fall Saturday. Well, that's genuinely where we are in Chicago. That's genuinely where we are. It's kind of wild. Democracy is going to rest on whether we make this case to our fellow Americans as quickly as possible and actually get these ballot initiatives passed, reward, elevate, amplify legislators and leaders that actually are on board with this, that they see that trying to defeat the other party is not the only thing that we should be doing. We should also be trying to strengthen our democracy and make it more genuinely sustainable and resilient for the test of time. The US has 2 parties. If all of you were designing this from scratch, 2 parties is a really dumb number. It's like a very dumb structure. It's like, actually, if you take a moment to think about it, you're like, wait a minute, like 2 parties? That doesn't really make any sense. You look around the world, how many parties does the UK have? You probably don't know. I had to look it up too. 5. Germany. 7. Sweden.
7.
8. Netherlands. 18. If you have a system like that and one of the parties loses its mind, you're like, oh, well that sucks. They lost their mind over there at party number 7. But it's not an existential crisis for your country, you know what I mean? You're like, party number 7 has to get its shit together. And until then, let's just like ignore them. But here in the United States of America, one party loses its shit and we're all like, oh my gosh, like the world is going to come to an end. And unfortunately, those fears, you know, they have some merit because of a design flaw, because of like very, very poor design. So our mission now is to try and upgrade our design and our operating system as quickly as possible. And the folks at Faribault, Illinois are actually doing the hard work to make it happen. You all are my heroes because you're so far ahead of the curve. Again, it seems so wonky, you know, it's like ranked choice, what? But ranked choice voting will save us. And ranked choice voting will actually unlock all of the new ideas that have lain dormant because they couldn't get through the grinder of the duopoly and the major party system for a long time. There's so much energy around this. I'm walking around the streets of New York and someone just yells, hey, independent at me. And I was like, wow, that never happened to me before as a Democrat. No one was like, hey, Democrat. That didn't happen. So there's massive appetite and energy, but we're going to need your help. We're going to need you to actually volunteer for Faribault, Illinois, volunteer for the Forward Party, take this message to your friends, and let's get this done because we won't have that much time. Democracy's future hangs in the balance. The country we will leave to our children hangs on our ability to move this country we love so much, not left or right, but forward, and that is where we are going to take it. Thank you so much, Chicago. Let's get this done together. Let's fight for this country, and let's leave something we are proud of to our children. Thank you so much. I love Chicago so much. I love you too. We love Faribault. And now I'm happy to take some questions. Caesar, the fact I know his name is a cheat. You sound like a ringer, but whatever, Caesar, go ahead, shout out.
So you talk about ranked choice voting, and I'm sure you're familiar with other methods like star or approval. Do you have any plans to like incorporate those in the platform as well?
Thank you. So Caesar, you just nerded out on everyone. They were still getting used to this ranked choice voting thing. So there are a number of voting systems that would be vastly superior to our current plurality voting system, which really is archaic and doesn't make much sense. There are virtues to ranked choice voting, there are virtues to star, there are virtues to approval. I'm settled on ranked choice voting in large part because it's been adopted in Maine, Alaska, New York, Minneapolis, San Francisco. And so building upon that success when it resolves the spoiler effect and a lot of other issues seems like the best approach, but I'm a huge fan of both star and approval voting as well.
Awesome, thank you.
Sir.
John, what kind of pushback, if any, do you expect from the establishment on, making ranked choice or open primaries?
So John's question, if you didn't hear it, is what kind of pushback do you expect to hear in terms of the establishment on open primaries and ranked choice voting? The counter-arguments are not great. Like, the main counter-argument seems to be partisanship is okay, we've got this under control, we don't need people voting that aren't part of our party. That seems to be the main argument for closed party primaries. One of the interesting things, John, is that if you look at states where there's this movement around open primaries and ranked choice voting, they run the gamut in terms of their politics. A lot of red states really like it because red states, at this point, like trying to stick it to the man, I guess. They're like, they even see their own party as the man in this example, so they're like, yeah, power to the people. So the arguments for it are very, very strong. The arguments against it really boil down to we know better. Now, is there a lot of knee-jerk resistance? And this is one of the tasks we have in front of us, is when someone says, for example, oh, you're just going to be a spoiler, you're just going to empower the bad guys to win, whoever the bad guys are, to say, look, if you make this change, then problem solved. No? And if someone is very, very concerned about Trump, which is very, very correct and legitimate, you can say, if the Republicans had used ranked choice voting in 2016 during the primary, Trump probably never gets elected. Because he was running around at 35 to 40%, but he wasn't getting 51%, and I'm going to suspect that a lot of those ballots were not Jeb Bush 1, Donald Trump 2. Now, there weren't a lot of ballots that looked like that, you know what I mean? So if someone is at one of the extremes, really exciting, let's call it 25 to 30% of people, that will actually win in our current system, but with ranked choice voting, it probably won't. That's one reason I love ranked choice voting. But John, to your question, the main objection seems to be just spoiler effect, and it's like that's why we're doing what we're doing. Is trying to get rid of it. So that's the problem. Let me go this way. Sure.
And you have a question is like for the current presidential election, it's like each state is winner takes all. Do you think like it's separated for each state that can help a bit? That's one question. The second, we see you are the front runner for New York. We really happy, you may be the mayor. The New York have the ranked choice vote, and eventually didn't turn out to be that great. So is there anything we can learn to further support your cause for this type of thing?
Oh, thank you for the question. So what's funny is I tell a joke during my media interviews. Take it from a guy who lost a ranked choice voting election. Ranked choice voting is awesome. I love ranked choice voting because it's just a more reasonable, modern process and enables you to vote your true preferences. It gets rid of the spoiler effect, at least theoretically discourages you from campaigning negatively, though I'm going to suggest that didn't really happen in New York. But in theory, at least, if I trash you and it's ranked choice voting, then we both lose and then someone else benefits. In terms of the state winner-take-all allocation of electoral votes, I would like to see that change. Whether or not we can change that in the time frame we have, we'll see. But that's part of the process that does lead, in my mind, to a direction that doesn't necessarily speak to the will of the people, because you win by a smidgen and then you get all the electoral votes. It's headed this way. Yes. Is that Zenobia? No.
Yes, it is.
Hey, Zenobia, how are you?
Fantastic. Thank you. I would like to know, being that I am from a minority community who is straight Democrat, they go down the ballot Democrat.
thank you. If you didn't hear Zenobia's question, she's from a highly democratic community, and she was asking how she can make the case to them for a different approach or a different voice. The first thing is you can say, look, this is a welcoming, inclusive movement. You can be a registered Democrat and still be for these reforms. Independents, Republicans, everyone's welcome. That is one way to go. Another way to go is to suggest that the current situation is just not working for anyone of any political alignment, Democrat, Independent, Republican, that if you just want the system to work better, we need to try and make some changes. This is harsh, but someone has taken to saying that at this point, choosing between the two parties is a choice between disintegration and neglect. It's a little bit harsh, but there are a lot of people that kind of agree with that sentiment. So if you wanted to be somewhat contentious, you could bust that out and like really start, you know. I would probably opt for one of the first two. It's like, look, these reforms will help everyone, and even if you're a very, very avid Democrat or Republican, you should see the merit in us trying to reform a system that's not working. Thank you, Snowy. It's good to see you. You look great. Yes?
What's your opinion on the infrastructure bill and reconciliation? To be blunt, is it going to pass?
Oh wow, he's asking me to put my political commentator hat on. Wait. Go in the back.
Someone's talking infrastructure, right? So.
I think the infrastructure bill will pass. I mean, like most everyone was for that. It would be unfathomable to me that that does not pass. I think reconciliation will pass in some form too. I do think that the momentum was higher during this past period. And I think that letting this momentum stall was probably not ideal, and I think it's going to result in a smaller package eventually passing personally. But I do think that it would be political malpractice for them not to pass at least the infrastructure bill and then some version of the reconciliation bill. If that prediction is wrong, then things are even worse than Andrew Yang is saying. That would be very, very bleak. If we're empty-handed down the stretch of this year legislatively, like wow. And for the record, I am for just about everything I've seen proposed. Like I'm super for the infrastructure package. I'm for just about everything I've seen in the social infrastructure package. My one complaint is that more of it should be in cash and cash relief. You know, like, so one of the numbers from the CARES Act, $2.2 trillion, that was enough to give every American $1,000 a month for 6 months. You know what I mean? Like, as it is, people and families got 17% of that money. It's like, where the heck did the other 83% of it go? You know, I mean, you know, like, I dig. I mean, so that would be, to me, like a measure. I am excited to say that it looks like this child tax credit is going to be included and is going to stand the test of time. And that's something that I am so proud to have played a role in. I did lobby, 65 members of Congress around that. And the fact that it's sticking around, I'm really excited about. At least the best information I have is that the child tax credit is staying. I mean, who knows what could go on down there, but like, as of 2 days ago, I was told that the child tax credit is going to be there. Look at this, I genuinely do have some connections where they call me and tell me what's what, and then tell me to shut up. No, I will not shut up. I should do that. Those conversations do happen though. That's good.
I paid $200 to be here.
I'm sorry? Wow, it's very, very assertive. and assertiveness wins. Go ahead, sir.
So I appreciate what you're saying about Alaska, and that I think what you're saying, if I can paraphrase, is that extreme partisans can be ostracized by using ranked choice voting in Alaska. I would caution you to say the same thing didn't happen in Maine. But I follow you, and you addressed a crowd in Taiwan where a gentleman got up and asked you about the possibility of voting, of expressing disapproval of one's least preferred candidates with a thumbs down negative vote. What do you think is more likely to ostracize extremists? Ranked choice voting or expressing disapproval of one's least preferred candidate?
And so is the disapproval, is that part of the approval voting system that
It's not.
you're talking about?
It could be, but it's not.
So one thing I love about ranked choice voting is that It enables you to express your preferences in a way that rewards folks who are able to build a broader coalition. So there's nothing wrong with having people who are super, having your back, as long as it's not taking positions that are going to drive away a critical mass of voters. And so the joy is that, let's say, even if I had a niche issue that 5% of the people in my community really cared about, a smart candidate in a ranked choice voting election would actually try and take that issue and like incorporate it into their platform, so you can actually get different points of view expressed. I am very excited about the fact that if you're kind of extreme and you have 25% of people who love you and then 60% of people who are deeply concerned about you, that you're unlikely to be as successful. And I think that switch is really what the country has been waiting for. Like, we are losing our minds, turning against each other, and our system is designed to reward folks who play that game. It will take reasonable people and make them seem unreasonable. It will take moral people and make them act immorally. And that's my fundamental message, is that we're being set up, Chicago. We're being set up, we expect better results and we're not going to get them. Like, the new rational thing is just to say, like, I should expect what the system is designed to give me. And the system is designed to give me heartache, frustration, extremity, and divisiveness. So that's what we have to change. If we make it so the system's designed to give me what 51% of us want, I will take that bet 1,000,000 times over compared to what we're getting right now. One last question, sir. In the New York hat, I guess that's cool, right?
I was going to ask, like, in cities with extreme partisan voting, like Detroit, like where they've been failed for decades upon decades, do you think ranked choice voting would take off faster or slower?
I think this goes to Zenobia's question, which is, so this is another lesson that I learned in some ways. Well, this is actually an appropriate note to close on. This will be fun. All right. It turns out that all of politics is tribal. And at this point, we've been separated into tribes based upon various appeals, the media we consume, and a bunch of other things. I ran for president, and it turns out that the way I talk, facts, figures, economics, any of that stuff, is itself a political language. Now, that political language does not work on 51% of people. It works on approximately 10%. And you all are among that 10% that I'm looking for. Now, it turns out that that is about what we need to win. If we get 10% of the country super energized around this message and this mission and this new political tribe, we can transform politics in America. I'll give you an example. Right now you have this hyper-polarized Senate. How many senators would you need to control the agenda? Apparently 1 or 2. You don't need to have 50 senators, you just need to get 1 or 2. If we get 10% of Americans aligned around this vision, oh, we'll get that senator. Like, we might get that senator in 22, and his name is Evan McMullen. So there are different things that we can do without trying to get the 51%. If we get our 10%, we win Chicago. That's the joy of it. I hope you're excited to join me in getting this 10%. Are we going to get this 10%? So to your question, when you have like a relatively democratic voting place, district, you should know that this appeal probably will not win 51% of them over. There'll probably be some percentage of them like, oh yeah, it makes sense. Or like, oh, I like that Yang fella, he tried to give us money, or whatever the appeal is. But in many ways, what we're after is developing this new tribe that's positive, that's unifying, that's solutions-oriented. I'm going to suggest to you all that's what the country needs right now. That's what it's been waiting for. And I'm going to do everything in my power to give it to them, and I hope you will join me. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Chicago. I love you.